In this speech, I will inform this audience about the lack of representation of women in the sports industry, and it's mostly related to the game of basketball. I chose basketball just because I've been around it more and I can see firsthand of how things run, how things can improve to run more smoothly, and how women actually are very underrepresented in this field. I worked as a basketball manager for the junior varsity and the varsity teams at my old high school, and then I also recently was a announcer for all basketball teams across the high school level, so I got to see like the behind the scenes stuff of game days and stuff like that. In this first slide, I have picked some of the more popular male basketball players just because you don't need to know who, you don't need to label who they are. You just automatically know who they are. You know that it's Steph Curry, you know that it's Kobe Bryant, you know Michael Jordan, you know these names because they are talked about so much. They're publicized, they're everywhere. And so that's like one of the main issues of women collegiately and professionally. Playing the sport, there's problems within it and for it. The jobs related to the sports industry are very limited for women and are very, very like more at high risk of turning them away for just being a woman in this position. And then coverage of women's sports, like media related. There really isn't a whole lot of women's time or women's time spaced out on ESPN or other sports related topics of media. So for one of the main topics of playing the sport for opportunities, I decided to break it down for collegiately and professionally. So when you graduate high school and you're a woman, you only have 351 D1 colleges to choose from to go, and that was from the NCSA article of the top women's basketball colleges. If you're a male, you have 400 D1 colleges that more than likely you will receive at least 20 offers for. Girls do not receive that many. They receive maybe 5, and they have, if they want to, they choose between one of the 5. Professionally, for women, after you graduate college and you spend 4 years there, you can be drafted, but you can only be drafted to one of 12 teams, like 1 out of the 12. And that was from the Women's National Basketball article by Adam Augustine. But if you're a male and you want to go into the NBA draft, you can draft or enter the draft after 1 year of being in college. You don't have to stay your full 4 years, but with the draft, there's 30 teams that you could be drafted to. You could be drafted to one of 30 teams. And that's just from an article from Sports Z Pro about the NBA team list. And that's where this picture leads. So these two basketball players, they went to the same college, but Skylar Diggins, she's a little bit older. Arike Ogunbowale, she's a couple years older than me. And then Candace Parker, she's been around in the league for a really long time, and she's actually been a really big activist, an advocate for women in the sports industry across all sports, not just basketball, about saying like we need to get in there, we need to be right where the men are, we need to be talked about, we need to be just voicing our opinions more. So that's one of the other problems, is that coaching positions like for jobs are not given to women very easily. They're highly criticized and bashed for being a coach because they're seen as over emotional and dramatic about things. But to support this, I have a story or a quote from Becky Hammon. Just because something's never been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. Leadership has no gender. And she was the first full-time paid female assistant coach in NBA history, hired in 2014. And that was from an article from Daniel Rappaport, just about opening to hire her to coach a men's sport. And these two graphs right here, this one is talking about Indiana specifically, a college in Indiana, about the Title IX was passed, and that means that you can't discriminate against race, gender, or ethnicity in looking for jobs and applying for jobs. And this shows that the national average is 40%, but this school falls 33%, so that falls underneath the 40% benchmark. And then these are just talking about which colleges are more likely to have a higher rate of hiring a female coach. And here's a picture of another female coach being an assistant coach and talking to a Spurs basketball player who is in the NBA. But another big problem is coverage of women's basketball, so media coverage. Female athletes aren't depicted a certain way because they're looked at a certain way. Again, it goes back to them being stereotyped as over-emotional, not invested enough into the sport, they're invested to other things, stuff like that. And references to appearance, age, and family life are more made towards women than they are to men. And that comes from the Gender Equality in Sports Media article by UNESCO. And then there's also men's sports appeal to audience more entertaining to watch. There's a lot more going on with it. And women's sports in the U.S. receive only 4% of media coverage. And that's from Shira Springer, The 7 Ways to Improve Coverage of Women's Sports. In conclusion, there are fewer opportunities for females to go pro or to even go to college. A lot of stigma and hesitation to hire female coaches. And that goes back to the stereotypical answer of they're emotional or they're overdramatic about things. The media coverage is very minimal, especially around, we couldn't have it unfortunately because of COVID-19, but the March Madness, there is way more coverage about March Madness for men for the NCAA than there are women. And that's been proven because they have to get their ratings up, but the women aren't doing it for some reason, so they always go back to the men to help them out. But my final thought to leave you is, next time you watch any sports event or you're attending one, see how many females there are behind the scenes or on the bench or running around trying to help, or they're trying to be an athletic director, they're being a coach, they're being an assistant coach, they're being a manager or anything like that. Because I think if people paid more attention to stuff like that, I think they would realize that there is a very high importance and there are a lot of women.